This is Elementary Greek. I'm Joel Arnold with Foundation Baptist College. And with this lecture, we're moving now to the chapter in Merkel and Plummer, chapter 11, on the first aorist indicative verbs. Now, as we've worked through, we've made good progress together studying the different verb tenses. We don't need to entirely review all of them, except just at a quick glance. We picked up the present. We picked up the imperfect, and you should, if these are not clear to you already, go back and take another look at them, make sure they're clear. We also worked through in our previous lecture the future. And with the future, we also added this idea of infixes, or a letter that you might add in between the stem and the ending. In this case, with the future, the sigma is the sign of the future. In the passive, we do a theta eta. So one of the conclusions of that, we had a little discussion of grammatical markers, the recognition that there are a handful of different markers. The epsilon augment is a sign of the past time indicative. Sigma we discussed as a sign of the future, the theta eta passive. And now we come to another marker I introduced, but we have not yet used. And that is right here. The sign of the aorist is a sigma alpha. Now, aorist is not a tense that you immediately recognize. You may have learned an imperfect tense, or at least a perfect tense when you studied English. Present, future, those are obvious enough. Aorist is actually a German word, but it's used here in Greek for the past tense, kind of the simple past. And I'll make a little distinction of what that looks like. But if we just start here with these markers, you would recognize that not only do I have the sigma alpha aorist marker, but because it's a past time indicative tense, I also expect to have an augment. Okay, both of those will be critical for working with the aorist. And if I now want to put that in terms of morphology, if I want to put that in terms of charts, here's what that's going to look like in actual implementation. The first aorist is as follows. In the active, middle, and passive, we have each of them a separate form. So you remember the present and the future, middle, passive, the present and the imperfect, the middle and the passive are together. Whereas in the future, we discovered our first tense that has 3 separate charts. So also with the aorist. And the aorist in the first form, the active form, works like this. Okay, take a second, glance down it, see if you can make a guess or two about what's possibly going on. You could feel free to pause the video. Sometimes this kind of guessing analysis is really helpful for students because they discover it themselves and then they remember it. Okay, so do your best, see what you can find. And if you pick up a couple of these different phenomena, you're on the right track. Here I'm recognizing my stem. Here's the augment that I just discussed a little bit ago. Here's that sigma alpha. Okay, there we go. This is the basic formula for the aorist, at least the aorist active. You're going to start with the augment, then the stem, sigma alpha, and then the ending. That's your formula. Augment, stem, sigma alpha, ending. Now, if you look across the endings, you also have to work out what's going on with those endings. And your key here would be to remember what we did earlier with the imperfect. So we learned active and middle passive secondary endings. Primary just means we use those with the present and the future. Secondary, we're going to use that with all of the other forms with one exception. So the secondary endings you learned as new, sigma, blank. I like to put an asterisk there, just a blank spot, men, te, new. There's going to be some slight variation over here with the aorist, and that variation would occur in these spots. Number one, instead of the new right here, I'm expecting elusan, but it's actually just going to be left elusa. And it follows if I move downwards from there, elusas, okay, new, sigma, blank. It follows that in the blank down here, in order to distinguish it, I'll have to do something different. If I just had elusa down here with a blank, these two forms would be identical. We've seen in a couple of places the imperfect first singular and third plural. They are identical. It can happen. But keeping these distinct, over here I have elu se instead of elu sa. All right, that's one distinction. From there, I continue on pretty normally with expectations, augment, stem, sa, ending, elusamin, elusate. And then this is my last, and this actually does fit the pattern that we learned, elusan. I've got the final nu here. And if you remember our original pattern that we learned for these endings, we learned nu, sigma, blank, mente, nu. That's where these two, at least in the imperfect, were identical. So part of what's going on in the aorist is that this difference right here could functionally allow us to distinguish the first person singular and the third person plural, unlike the imperfect. Okay, but essentially you need to remember that there's no nu here, that there's an epsilon here. Everywhere else, you're just using the chart, following the regular pattern. Okay, not a lot of fresh memory there. Let's go to the next. If I run across again, let's review our secondary endings. So secondary middle passive endings here were main, sa, ta, methus, the, in, ta. Main, sa, ta, methus, the, in, ta. Let's go see what that looks like over here in the aorist middle. In the first aorist middle, I've got this pattern that we've seen, augment, stem, sigma, alpha. From there, I'm going main, sa, ta, methus, the, in, ta. Everything works out. Okay, so my formula there is just augment plus stem plus sigma alpha plus middle endings. And actually then, in that case, the memorization across these two charts, I'm using the same formula for both. Okay, the one little detail you've got to remember here, in the imperfect, this sa right here, what was written originally as a sigma omicron, it changed over to u. Okay, so the imperfect form for that spot is elu u. That is the combination, I'll try to write that a little better. That is the combination of a theoretical elu e sa. The sigma dropped out, and the epsilon plus omicron, you remember from your contract vowels, epsilon plus omicron equal u. So that's how I got that in the imperfect. Up here, I'm going to get a little bit of a different equation. In this case, I'm going to end up with elu so. Okay, the sigma in this case, and this actually makes sense according to the contract vowel rules that you learned. If there was a theoretical elu sa o, alpha plus omicron, sa sigma omicron there. Elu sa, the sigma drops out, the alpha plus omicron would contract into an omega. Okay, so whether that rule helps you or not is immaterial. If you want to just memorize elu so here versus elu u in the imperfect, that'll work. And from there, everything else is regular. Okay, essentially, again, reviewing it, you'll need to memorize an irregularity here, here, and here. Okay, everything else follows the pattern fine. Do you remember when we worked on the markers, what I called the grammatical markers? Remember we had a theta eta for the passive, and in the future, the combination of the future plus the passive gave us theta eta sigma. Well, in this case, we're just doing the theta eta passive. By the way, the theta eta pattern will only be used in the future passive, the aorist passive. It will reoccur later in the subjunctive for the aorist, but same holds. It's only in the future in the aorist passives that we use these. But it is a helpful thing to know that as a morpheme, as a pattern. And that's precisely what happens here in the aorist. The first aorist passive is going to be this pattern, augment plus stem plus theta eta. Okay, now here's the hard thing for students to remember. You will just have to log this one because it's very unexpected. Plus active endings, secondary active endings. Okay, by those we're using nu sigma blank mente nu rather than main sa ta methus the and ta. And those active endings then, once you do that, this will be fairly regular. Eluthane, eluthase, eluthe, eluthamen, elutheta. Okay, here's the one exception in this section to remember is that instead of the expected eluthane, again, kind of the way the imperfect matched between this spot and this spot, In this case, I'm going to get eluthe san. Okay, so reviewing those together, all of them in one shot, we would recognize something unexpected here, 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 and here. Otherwise, these are following the pattern of augment, stem, sigma alpha, ending. Okay, whether active, middle, ending, or, and this is another piece you do need to remember, active ending though it's passive. Okay, put those pieces together and congratulations. If you can remember those pieces, you will have mastered writing the first aorist. Now you can, this is a natural question that comes to mind at this point. If there is a first aorist, is there also a second aorist? And there is. The good news on that is that it's similar enough to the first aorist. We'll talk about it. It's a little bit of an exceptional issue, but that makes the next chapter easier. So chapter 12, I think you'll find, is a quick one because once you've learned the first aorist and you know that pattern, if you learn it well, the second aorist is a matter of recognizing that sometimes we don't do it that way. And that's essentially all we have there. Do you remember when we worked with the future, we had this issue, which is that while luo is a simple one, lu, sigma, okay, that works fine. And so I can do luso, luses, luse, lusamen, and so forth. We recognize that some verbs are going to be more problematic, like patho. And if you put the path plus a sigma after it, you're going to end up with pathso. It's just hard to work with. Or ago, you would end up with agso. And so one of the things that we suggested here, or that we talked about here, is that there is a system for how to work with the combination of the consonants and sigma. Okay, so just to recover that, what we looked at under the future, especially these top three, we observed dentals, palatals, labials, the t, d, th, z, all of them with the teeth plus sigma just go to a simple sigma. K, 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 ksi, which sort of makes sense. Pa, ba, fa goes to psi, sort of makes sense. Okay, that pattern, the handy thing, this pattern, especially these top three, and that's what you want to focus on for now, those top three, that pattern also accrues when we go across to the aorist. Okay, and you can, I think, see the logic on this. If the problem with the future was that I might end up with a consonant plus sigma, how to do path so, it follows from that that I also have that exact same scenario when I get to aorist. In aorist also, I've got this situation of a consonant plus sigma. And so what do I do in those cases? Follow the very same pattern. Okay, so in this case, we're going to do patho, and we're going to, there's another change that happens with it, but the basic following of it would go, okay, I'm going to put my augment, pay. Now I've got that, well, let's write it, that'll be better. I've got my augment going, epsilon on the front. Then I've got my stem, pay. Okay, my stem finishes with theta. Now I need to put on sigma alpha and an ending. Okay, I'll go with second person plural. And in this case, I've got that odd situation now of a theta and a sigma together. How do those fit? Well, we learned earlier when we looked at these that theta plus sigma is just going to go to sigma. Okay, and so what I would get in this case is I just essentially take out the theta. And I would end up with a structure like that, epesate. Okay, now we'll talk more about variation that happens with aorists, but my point in this is to go, as long as you aren't thrown by the missing theta, you ought to just realize here that the theta is hiding inside of the sigma. It's just following the rules that we used earlier with the futures. And knowing this chart then from the futures is going to be part of handling the aorist as well. Okay, similar things would happen with the other forms. So if I had an aorist combining with a gamma, then I'm going to get xi. If we do, let's say, doxazo, That's a zeta. That's going to be this consonant right here. Doxazo plus sigma is going to come out as edoxa sa. I'm just going to drop off the zeta entirely. Or let's go with this verb. Let's do dioko. And so if I did, excuse me a second here. If I did dioko as this is my root, okay, or that's the present active form. If I bring that across into aorist, I would expect an augment plus, here's my stem. Now, I have the kappa plus sigma alpha. What are we going to do there? Kappa plus sigma alpha are going to combine out kappa plus sigma. I'm going to end up with I'm going to end up with edioxa. Okay, and the kappa plus sigma have given me an xc. And that's what I end up with in my final form. One last example. This is blepo. And if I turn this into an aorist, I'll do blep. Now I've got p sigma alpha. What happens to those? P plus sigma will contract instead, and I'll end up with a psi. I'll end up with blepsa. Okay, those are the forms and how I would handle the morphology of the aorist. What's, I think, maybe possibly more pressing with some of these is to recognize how this actually looks in implementation and exegesis. And I didn't talk about this particular discussion when we worked on the future. I think in some ways it kind of fits better here. We can cover two topics at the same time by reviewing this discussion of tense. All right, here is a model that's supposed to represent a single verb tense. And you may have grown up thinking of tense because in English we hear future, past, and so forth, perfect. You may have grown up thinking of tense as just a time marker. It's a past tense, okay, it's all about the time. The point we're making here is that tense is actually comprised of two different components, both time and aspect. Under time, it's natural enough that you could have past, present, or future. Under aspect, less obvious, but we did discuss this prior, simple, linear, or completed are the three different ways you could say something. And what that looks like, if I put that into actual words, we can compare them like this. The time over here, past, present, future across the top. Okay, and so that would look like I ate, I eat, I will eat, past, present, future. But if we're going to work through the aspect, I'm going to work over on this side, simple, linear, completed. I'm fond, when I talk about the simple, of this, the dot as the simple marker, the linear as a line, it's kind of ongoing, the completed as a dot plus a line, like it happened, and then I have done this thing, that reminder. Okay, well, with that aspect taken into account, if I do simple of past, present, future, I just keep these as the simple verbs. I ate, I eat, I will eat. The linear, in English, the ways to get this is the ing. I was eating, I am eating, I will be eating, it's ongoing. So get an ing in there and you've gotten your ongoing linear. Versus the completed, I had eaten, I have eaten, I will have eaten. In English, get a have had and you'll have it. Okay, that's our matrix. All the combinations you can use, past, present, future, combined with simple, linear, completed, time on the top, aspect on the other side. The question goes, with that bit of review, how do these tenses work? And I'll start with the future since we've already discussed it. The future has future time. Hey, that makes sense. On the other side, future is maybe not so opinionated about the aspect. So I wouldn't quite say like future is simple aspect, but that's the closest one. Future just really doesn't have any of them in view in terms of a distinction. But basically, we'll say it's more or less simple aspect. And so that would come out in English. I'm translating across for English. I need to have a will, I will. But don't include an ing. That would be linear. Don't include a have or has. That would be completed. I will eat cheese. That does it. Future and it's simple. Okay, so what you want to remember with future time, simple aspect. And similarly, with the aorist, what we're going to do with aorist is past time, simple aspect. Okay, simple aspect, no ing, no have or has. It's just past time. That's what distinguishes it. Okay, and so future and aorist in this sense would be somewhat similar in terms of aspect. Future is going to be different from aorist in terms of time. Future is a future time, aorist is a past time. Aorist could be compared to the imperfect, and there we would discover that they're both past time, so this quadrant is the same. It's the difference in aspect. Imperfect is linear aspect. Aorist is a simple aspect. So for the imperfect, you'll use an ing, I was eating cheese. In the aorist, you'll just say, I ate cheese. And that's all there is to it. One comment I would give you here as a warning, I think it's maybe a small expression of a minor victory for us in Greek pedagogy. But there was a time when people talked about the aorist as emphasizing kind of a once-for-all, final, it's done kind of idea. And can I just encourage you, before you make a point in a sermon based on the aorist tense, you should always question yourself on that, right? This is not a good preaching point. It's aorist tense, it's once for done, it's all, it's finished. No, that's not what's going on. The aorist tense is really just kind of a basic sort of, we could almost say a vanilla tense. Maybe that's not fair, but it's kind of the default. It's just, well, it happened. And there's probably not a lot of exegetical payload to draw off of the aorist unless you have a contrast. One of your best ways to do that, if you have a good quality exegetical commentary, and they call out the aorist, okay, now maybe. But you don't want to do too much or draw out too much significance. Generally, this is kind of the default tense. What I would say, you've got a handful of places where there's an interesting phenomenon with the aorist. And this is where, in a handful of places, the aorist will be used, the past idea, for something that's not yet happened. So whom, this is a relative pronoun, you've studied this, or those whom, plural. Those whom he predestined, these also he called. Those whom he called, these also he justified. Which ones, or those ones, which he justified, these also he glorified. All of these are aorists. Well, the predestined, yeah, makes sense that that would be past. Called, yep, that's a past idea. Justified, well, if I'm a believer now, sure, it's past for me. Glorified, I've not experienced. I think this is probably the impact of an expression like that. It leaves you with this sense that Paul is telling you it's as good as done. I mean, as much as God called you and predestined you and justified you, so also, for all practical intents and purposes, we'll say he glorified you. Continuing on, other passages that do a similar thing. God also raised us up with him and seated us in heavenly places in Christ Jesus. These are both aorists. He raised us up, a past feeling, seated us. Well, I mean, I don't feel, I feel like I'm somewhere rather pedestrian, terrestrial. The idea that I am now seated with Christ in heavenly places would not have entered my mind. Paul is willing to say it. Again, it's a sense of it's already as good as done. Colossians 2, having been buried with him in baptism, in which also you were raised through faith in the powerful working of God who raised him from the dead. There's a sense here in which absolutely I've already been raised with Christ through faith. So I think that's, okay, solid notion. But I am waiting for an aspect of my resurrection, right? So there's both past and I'm raised to new life. I'm living differently. I'm also awaiting the full fruit of the resurrection. Revelation has two of these that came to my mind. In the days of the sound of the trumpet of the seventh angel, whenever the trumpet sounded. Also, the mystery of God would be fulfilled, is the way the ESV renders it here. Was fulfilled. It's an aorist passive, as he announced to his servants, the prophets. This is, I'm a futurist. This is still something that will happen. Okay, why use the aorist passive, the past? I think there's this sense, it's done, it's set. And similarly, finally in Revelation 14, a second angel followed saying, fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great. She, this is a relative pronoun, so who, but who feminine, from the wine of the wrath of the fornication of her, she caused, or it was caused, were given a drink, all the nations. All the nations were given a drink. This is the subject, and this is the verb. Okay, this up here, fallen, fallen, it's a past. As a futurist, again, my understanding is we're still waiting for the fall of Babylon. I mean, even if you go, if you're a non-futurist, you're waiting for this world system to fall and be destroyed and be judged. Okay, but we can go ahead and talk in the past because it's a set thing. It's as good as done. And I think these are instances that are legitimate very much for us to make the point about the aorist, for us to recognize there's something going on here bigger that is exegetical in how we handle the aorist. That is now, having done this, you have now gone through, if you're just cataloging the tenses that we've learned, 4 out of the 5 main tenses that we need to learn here. So our total in the whole set that we'll work with, I'll just put it up in this form, we will need to learn these 5. And as this goes then, you have already accomplished the present, you've already accomplished the future, the imperfect. We learned the aorist. We are going to add an additional lesson with the second aorist. So there's a kind of a variant form of the aorist, not too hard to work through. And that just leaves the perfect. Okay, we're well on our way to making good progress here for handling all of the main verb tenses. Now, we'll recognize more so in the second semester that we start working with non-indicative forms. So we start talking about subjunctive, imperative, infinitives, and participles. Each of those has their own form. I think you'll find with those that they are related to forms we've already learned. They're not as challenging. Participles are a challenge, but the other pieces come fairly quickly. And I just want to encourage you, you are most of the way at this point through the main verb system, which is a big deal in any language. And as you keep on working with this, you're making good progress with your understanding and your ability to read the Greek New Testament.